Welcome to Chapter Chats. I'm Heather.
And I'm Erin, and this is our new mini-series called The Tommen Chronicles.
The Tommen Chronicles will be our deep dive on the series The Boys of Tommen by Chloe Walsh and will encompass Binding 13 through Releasing 10. Binding 13 takes place in Ireland and follows Johnny and Shannon Lynch. Johnny is a popular rugby player at Tommen College, and Shannon is the introverted new transfer. The series follows their relationship as they both uncover hidden secrets about each other, their families, and how they navigate their relationship dealing with trauma and grief. So, Erin, what drew you to this series and what kind of captivated you and keeps you coming back?
So I'll be honest, I put a thing out on TikTok being like, tell me what books have high yearning. And literally 90% of the
Mhm.
comments were like, read The Boys of Tommen. So I was like, okay. So I read it. And I obviously I've spoken about this quite a lot. I didn't initially love it, but the story was very reminiscent of my life. So I was like, okay, I can get behind this. When I finished Binding and Keeping 13, I was like, oh, I want to find out what happens next. And that's what keeps me coming back. I think the characterization is so good that you really feel it's kind of like you've gone back in time down memory lane and you really feel like you're there with them. You really feel like you're in the moment with them. And I think that that's what keeps me coming back and what is so like gripping is they feel real. They feel like real people that you can really get to grips with. Um, and that's probably why I love it so much. What about you?
So, similar to you, the characterization, I love to see how she helps these children navigate grief. I think that these are a lot of heavy topics that a lot of people may
Mhm.
not be familiar with. I think that's what keeps me coming back is seeing what the reality is for children who grew up in homes similar to the Lynches, the Kavanaughs. Of course, we have the Youngs, the Gibsons. All of these new stories have a new interesting twist, and they all encompass heavy topics that a lot of people are very unfamiliar with. Having the representation that we see in the series is extremely important because I think those are a lot of heavy topics that a lot of authors don't really venture into. And this is something that Chloe has kind of embraced full force. And, we have the core 10 who are all dealing with different struggles, some the same struggles, but ultimately how their lives are very, very different, despite having similar struggles. And I think that's what I love is that every time we get a new POV, we're getting a new introduction to
Mhm.
the same traumas, but in a different form from a different individual. And I think that I love that. And I keep just coming back to it every time there's a new POV. I cannot wait to see how the same event is unfolding from multiple perspectives. It's how your opinion changes with each POV that you're given as well. For Binding 13, we start out in Shannon's POV, and just right off the bat, what were your initial thoughts of Shannon?
She strikes me as someone who is extremely conflict avoidant, especially at the
Mhm,
beginning. She's talking about how shy she is, the bullying she's been through, and how she isn't a shouter. She wishes that she was, but she talks about how
mhm.
she's very introverted and she seems very gentle natured, and that she has suffered so much. And sort of like if she makes herself less, she'll be less of a burden. That's kind of the vibe she gets right from the bat, that if she makes herself smaller and that she's hopeful for a better life for herself, like that's ideally what she wants from going to the school. And that's kind of the vibe
Yeah.
that she gets, that you get from
Mhm.
her right from the offset, but also just that she's very kind natured.
Yes.
She's a very anxious
Riddled
person.
with anxiety.
Yeah, you get
Yes.
that right from the beginning that she's very rigid
Mhm.
with anxiety. I also was thinking, because I was reading it the other day and I was like, she's also very intuitive, I think, of what's going on
Yeah.
around her, like hyper vigilant to what's going on around her
Mhm.
all the time. Probably because you find out what her environment is like, and all
Mhm.
the bullying she's been through. But she's very
Yeah.
hyper vigilant to the people around her, but very soft and kind natured as well. Um, which makes her such a
And I think
likable,
that
like,
being hyper vigilant is also almost a trauma response, right? So
mhm,
when you grow up in a home like Shannon's where somebody else's mood kind of dictates how the rest of your evening is going to be, you kind of start to learn those cues, right? So when we get into it in a little bit, we talk about how like she is aware of what days of the month are going to be hard days at home,
mhm,
depending on what allowances are being given by the government or when her father's paychecks come in. And I think that part of that environment has created same thing with Joey, her brother, is this constant state of anxiety and having to be hyper aware of how other people are feeling. And I think
yeah,
that definitely carries on to her friendships and how she treats the people around her because she's just so used to being that constant state of anxiety where
mhm.
again someone else's moods and feelings dictate how her day or evening is going to go.
I mean, she's hyper vigilant to the point of like self erasure. She seems to erase herself and what she's feeling throughout it because she's so aware. She's too focused on what everyone else might possibly be feeling in the moment. And I actually made a note
Mm.
the other day that I think one of the reasons why she starts to like Johnny at the beginning is because on her very first day, she asks him to keep a promise. and he keeps his promise. And for her, that's really important that he does that. And I
Yeah.
noticed that that's probably one of the reasons why she starts to warm to him, is because she
Mhm.
makes him promise and he keeps it. And I think for
Yeah.
her, that's something she does with her brother quite a lot. Wherever she's feeling a bit anxious, she asks her brother, "You promise?" And he's like, "Yeah, I promise." And when he keeps his promise, it soothes something in her. And Johnny is probably one of the first people who has ever done that for her, which is why her
Mhm.
feelings for him start to grow throughout the book, because that's one
Mhm.
of the first things she notes. They go on a break, which we'll talk about later, but when they come back from their break, she's like, to be fair, he did keep his promise. And I think for her,
Mhm.
that's quite a big thing, because she obviously, as it unravels, find out she doesn't really trust anyone. And the reason why she doesn't
Yeah.
trust anyone is because the men in her life haven't been great. But she starts to learn that she can trust this guy who did keep his promise to her, which is a really big deal to her, which I thought was really interesting that that was in there, because it's a throwaway line um, in one of the chapters. It's just one sentence, but it's not like a big obvious sentence. But she's like, yeah, he did keep his promise. And I think to her that's really important, which I thought was really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. And I find that she's someone who keeps the peace. And it's not really a personality trait. It's more what she's learned in survival to like
Yeah.
try and keep the peace. It's part of her survival mechanism. So she's someone who comes across quite meek, but her survival is about keeping the peace, making herself as small as humanly possible in order to not be seen and not be a burden and not be in the way, which you also learn about her through the beginning of the book, is that she sort of will hide herself on the not
Mhm.
good days, you know? And
Yeah.
that's kind of my character analysis of her, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's great. So what about for Johnny? I know your opinion has changed throughout the
Yeah.
series, but kind of tell me your initial thoughts on Johnny's character.
My initial thoughts were that he was a creep. I'm not gonna lie, that's what I initially thought of him. He has a line where he's like, "She doesn't look like she's old enough to go to the school." So in my head,
Mhm.
I was thinking of a British secondary school, which would mean she was 11 years old, and I was like, "Ugh." And then he starts immediately talking about how attractive she is, so I was like, "What on earth are we talking about?" But now I would say that he's very protective, and
Mhm.
he's deeply loyal, and he is self-sacrificing for the people that he loves.
Yeah.
Like, he would sacrifice everything for the people that he loves. And I would say he's actually really prone to guilt,
Yeah.
rather than saying, because I said that he had a hero complex. And looking back on
Mhm.
it now on reflection, I think it's more that he can be quite driven by guilt. So when he hurt because later on in the chapter, there's a conflict between them when they first meet, which we'll talk about in a bit. But when he hurts her, he's like driven by his guilt, rather than, I originally took that as like, oh, he's got a hero complex. That's why
Yeah.
he's interested in her. I actually think that he feels guilt quite a lot, which is later displayed throughout the books as well. And that guilt is what drives him to sort of want to protect her, because he feels bad. So he's quite guilt driven and internalizes blame quite a lot, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and he's got this like persona of a man that he projects, because that's what he feels like he should be because of the world that he's been placed into. But he is still very much a boy. Like, I think he has this
Yes.
persona, but he is still very much like a boy. But he's the emotional stabilizer of the group, I would say, the one that everyone goes to. He's obviously the captain of his rugby team. So he's the one that people turn
Mhm.
to for advice. He's the one that people turn to for leadership. He's the one that people listen to. He's the reliable one. And often when a teen is placed in that kind of role, his whole thing comes around fixing people, absorbing what's going on around him. Although we know that Johnny kind of just focuses on rugby, but he becomes a bit of a person for everyone to lean on, the middle ground for everyone to sort of go to with their problem. So, what did you think of Johnny? Like, what was your character analysis when you first started reading him?
So for Johnny, I immediately thought that he was a protector. I thought that from basically like the initial impact of that rugby ball hitting Shannon's head.
Mhm.
And throughout the entire series, I think it just kind of reaffirmed to me, like one that you said, how he's driven by a lot of guilt. And I think that every time we see him do something that is incorrect, improper, he kind of beats himself up internally and he tries to think like, how can I fix this? Even when he's having conflict with people that he doesn't necessarily like or get along with, he still seems to have that internal reflection of I shouldn't have done that or I shouldn't have said that. And so I do think that he, like you said, he internalizes a lot of that guilt and it kind of makes him want to change his behavior. I think that he's a protector. I think that he is that great middle ground for all of his teammates to lean on. I think all throughout Binding and Keeping 13, we see all of his teammates kind of rallying around him for support, for, conflict resolution, for the leadership that he kind of
Mhm.
signifies for the team. And so I've always just looked at him as a protector. And even though at times he can be very short with people people around him. I've never got this idea that he had a hero complex. So when you told me that your initial thought was that he had a hero complex, I was shocked because I was like, "Wait, like, how did you think he had a hero complex?" Like, I thought he
Mhm.
was, like, this great protector. And so I'm glad that, like, your perspective has shifted a little because I was like, "Okay, maybe I kind of misread this." And of course, everyone in the series is going to see something different, and, we're all gonna read the same book, and we're all gonna walk away with a different perception of these characters. But I've just always thought he was a protector, he's very loyal, and one of the things that's really bothered me is that people talk about how he's an unreliable narrator. And while to
They're
a
all
small
unreliable
extent
narrators, that's the point
yeah,
though. Yeah, like,
yeah,
it's
I'm
from
just
their
like
perspectives.
exactly, I'm like, everybody is, to an extent, an unreliable narrator,
Yeah.
so I personally don't view Johnny as any more unreliable as any of the other characters. I think it's I honestly hate the term unreliable narrator. It's just a different perception, right? If
Mhm.
they're all at the same events, they're all perceiving something different. So I don't like to say that any of them are unreliable narrators. They all just have a different perception of these events, and I think that's kind of a more accurate,
'Cause I had that
way
from
to
someone
phrase
about
it.
Shannon as well. Sorry, I just cut you off there, but I had that about someone
Yeah.
Shannon. They were like, "Yeah, but Shannon doesn't get everything right." Okay, but the whole point is that it's multi-point of view, so you can see it from everyone's
Yeah.
point of view. It doesn't make them any less reliable, it just means they're seeing it from a different
Yes.
viewpoint, which is what makes them valid. They're not unreliable,
Yes.
they just have a different perception. But the same way you and I could be watching the exact same car crash happen at the exact same time, and we might perceive different things about that car crash, which means we might be looking at it from different perspectives. It doesn't make yours any less true or mine any less true. It's just that we're not looking at it through the
Exactly.
same lens. And the same can be said about the books. Heather, you have previously said to me that Shannon is the most isolated character in your eyes. And I think that's a really interesting point, and I want you to tell me
Mhm.
more about that because I'd love to hear
Yeah.
why you think that.
Yeah, so I think that Shannon is the most isolated character because Shannon has never been given a break. We know that she's being abused at home by her father, emotionally abused in ways by her mother, and then she goes to school where she is being bullied, she's being harassed, and this has been for her an entire life, right? So we have Shannon's direct quote, we're saying that she has been bullied since she was in preschool, and the bullying got so bad to the point where she asked her own mother to, like, let me go move with my aunt because I can't take this anymore. It's just like the continuous abuse at home and at school, and she just never gets a break from it. And we don't see her get a break until Johnny enters and offers her that ounce of freedom. So for me, I just think that not that it's a competition of who's the most isolated, but I think that her isolation is very overlooked by this fandom. And I think that, obviously when Johnny enters the picture, we kind of see her edging out, like getting that freedom. She's being able to go to social events, and he kind of gives her, I think, as you said before, like he gives her desire to want more in life. And I think that's very accurate. But before that, we know she's 15 years old and she spent the entire 15 years going from abuse at home to abuse at school to abuse at home again. And so for me, I think that's just incredibly isolating. And to see her friends be able to go to social events, go to sports, be a part of different teams, they still have some outlet. They have boyfriends, they're dating around, they're getting to experience a lot of normal things for teenage girls to experience that Shannon herself has never been able to partake in.
Yeah. She even notes in the beginning of Binding that her brother, even though he's in the same home as her, even though he's experiencing the same things of her within their home, he is loved by the people in his school. He's on the Hurley
Yeah.
team. He has a job, and he is out of the house for like near on 10 to 11 hours of the day. And she has to go
Mhm.
straight home after school. So she goes to school and she gets severely bullied. And then as soon as she finishes school, she's straight back home where she's being severely bullied. And also on top of that, I think people really overlook the fact that she will be doing all the cleaning and all the dinners because her father would have
Mhm.
reduced her down to just being a woman, and these are the roles that women do. And her mum is often described as being someone who is bedbound and not very there, like super vacant. So she takes on the
Mhm.
mother role, and she's been doing it from quite a young age. And then all she has in her room are books. So she goes to her room and she just reads books. And one of the things she notes in the beginning of Binding as well is it's the first time in her life when she starts going to that school that she's ever found relief from going anywhere else. Like
Yeah.
she's 15 years old, and I think you made this point. And that's the first time she's ever felt any kind of relief in her whole life. So for 15 entire years of living, she has never
Mhm.
had any relief, never had any support, never had any help except for in the form of her
Yeah.
siblings. Um, she didn't get to see her friends for, I guess, if she went for now for like 2 3 years, she wouldn't have seen Claire and Lizzie because she's been in a completely
At
separate
a
school
separate
to them. So the
school.
only 2
Mhm.
friends she's made, she hasn't been able to see. She's not allowed to go to social gatherings, so she wouldn't have been able to see them. So she's literally
Mm,
been on her own, and her brother is out of the house. The one person she can confide in, the one person she is close to, is barely around. He comes home late at night. She's probably typically in bed. So for a lot of the time, she probably wouldn't see Joe either. So she was
mhm.
quite literally on her own. And it's not until
Yeah.
she starts to trust Johnny and she starts to like Johnny, and he's the first boy she notes that she's ever fancied, that she starts to get this
Yeah.
like desire to
Mhm.
wanna break the mold a little bit. She wants things for herself now, which I think she had never
Yeah.
had before, and that thing is Johnny, more so than the social interactions. And I think, because in the very first chapters, Johnny concusses her. He
Mhm.
hits her in the head with a rugby ball, and then he makes a promise to her that he won't let her whole skirt comes up and she flashes basically to the whole rugby team.
Mhm.
And he makes a promise to her that like he won't let anyone hurt her or mock her for it. I think he promises like he won't
Yeah.
let
Mhm.
anyone bully her over it, and she was really worried about that. And then the next time he sees her, I think they don't really interact again for a while until the rugby match. I'm sure I could be wrong on
Yeah,
that.
so it's actually a 2-month gap, and that's why I dislike when people say that Johnny had insta-lust for Shannon, because after the rugby incident on the pitch, they don't speak for 2 months,
Mm,
and even then, it's like, we know that they don't even have their first kiss
mhm,
until, like, almost the end of the book, and it's like, how can you call it insta-lust when they have this initial interaction, don't speak for months, talk again, and they go another week and a half without speaking, and again, like, even when Shannon initially kisses Johnny, which, again, isn't even till, like, 70% of the way through the book,
mhm,
he doesn't kiss her back, and so this perception that Johnny is just insta-lust, and it's like, obviously, he was attracted to her, but, like, you would think that if it were all about insta-lust and that he was just, the whole point is that he just wanted to be with her intimately and physically, I think I would have expected him to at least try to kiss her from a much earlier time, but we never see Johnny pushing her for more intimately or physically, like, everything is a very, very slow process because he knows that he is much more experienced than she is, and he doesn't try to use that to his advantage to, or leverage that to, like, get with her physically or intimately sooner than that. He really just, like, he takes his time, lets her take her time, and even when she's begging him and she's ready to be kissed, he's still just like, "Not yet, not yet," because
mhm.
he's so timid and afraid of upsetting her or doing the wrong thing with
Oh,
someone he
also the
knows.
bloody age gap.
Yes, the age
He's
gap.
obsessed with the age gap. So Johnny and Shannon have an age gap of a year and 10 months. I looked it up. That's the age gap between them. And he is freaked out the entire time that he's going to get arrested and go to prison, which to me is hilarious. He spends the whole
Yeah.
book worrying about this age gap that he perceives them to have.
Yeah. So we have Shannon being hit with the rugby ball on the pitch by Johnny,
Hmm.
and he initially comes running over to her, sees that she's ripped her skirt, ripped her tights, and, he literally gives her the shirt off his back, which, bare minimum for what you've just done. Johnny kind of takes her to the office, and this is where we meet Marie, and this is our first interaction, and I think that I had a lot of false confidence when I see how Marie came into that office. She shoves Johnny, yelling at the headmaster, like, what happened to her at the last school. You said this wouldn't happen here. So I think that my perception of Marie in that moment was, again, false sense of security, because I'm like, okay, wow, like,
Hmm.
at least Shannon has a mom who's ready to support her, ready to throw down for her. And, the moment something happened to Shannon, her mom was here ready to go for her.
Yeah, I mean, you're literally watching that interaction. You're reading about how badly she's been bullied and how horrible everything's happening to her, and then you're like, "Oh, thank God, someone is in her corner." Like, she has an
Mhm.
adult in her corner because of the way that she reacts to Johnny, and she reacts so harshly to Johnny that it piques Johnny's interest. He's like, "What the fuck is going on here?" He's like, What do you
Mhm.
mean she's been so badly bullied?" He's like so interested in what her mum is saying, and he's a bit like freaked out by the reaction because it is such a strong reaction. And as a reader, you're like, "Go, mum!" Like, yeah, she's really got her doors back. And then as the book divulges, you're like, "Oh, no, she maybe doesn't." Like, it just gets
Yeah.
yeah, you have this real impression of her. I actually said this in a comment section today where I was like, the impression you get of her is that she is this lioness mum who's gonna, like, protect her baby cubs and chew their heads off, and you're really expecting her to really be in her daughter's corner, and I guess, like, outwardly, she is. Like, she does try and protect Shan outside of the home,
Mhm. Yeah.
and Johnny's a big guy. He's a big,
Yeah.
scary man, so you would think that
Mhm.
she would be a bit timid, but no, she's there in his face, really attacking him, so you get this impression that she's gonna really go to bat for her children, and she does not. She does not. I
Yeah.
just ugh. Despair.
The big false sense of security in that
Mhm.
scene. And then we have Johnny, he goes back to the rugby team and threatens every last one of them to not peep a word of what happened. And I think that that again reinforced this idea to me that Johnny truly is a protector because he did not know Shannon, knew nothing of her past, but all he knew was that he was not going to let anybody make a joke or make a mockery of this experience for her. And I think that to me, that just shows just how much one, the guilt got to him over this, but also like his protective nature took over. And I think we have Ronan, who, of course, is the first person to kind of, throw a jab out there like, oh, well, I have French with her. What are you going to do? And that's where Johnny, of course, like gets in his face and tells him, like, you're not going to do anything to her. You're not going to speak to her. And of course, you have the entire rugby team who kind of comes to stand in front of him and lets him know, like, you know what, Ronan, like, now's not the time to kind of piss Johnny off. Like, back off, lad. And so, again, I just really appreciate that, like, no questions asked. The first thing he does is goes and makes sure that not a single person is going to make a mockery or joke of out of what's happened to Shannon.
But also on the flip side of that, one of the first things we see Johnny do is fling his mouth guard at Patrick, one of his rugby team
Oh,
members, and
yes.
talking about how hungry
Mhm.
he is. And so the first impressions of him, he's like, I'm so hungry and like I shouldn't be on this team. And he just seems a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant. He's like, I'm used to playing with men, and he's pissed off. And then he
Yeah.
takes his wet mouth guard out of his mouth and he flings it at his rugby at one
Mhm.
of his teammates' heads. And I remember being like, what on earth? But you made a really great point. I'm going to let you say the point again of what he does after he flings that at his teammate's head.
Yeah, and hits Feely in the mouth. Yeah, so after he flings the mouth guard at Feely, he immediately regrets it. He apologizes to him, and we also see Feely kind of have that like that internal like, oh, like my bad, like it won't happen again, Cap. And so for me, at first, like you said, when he did that, I was like, okay, that was kind of a jerk move. But then almost immediately, he's apologizing, and so he apologizes once there, he apologizes again in the locker room, and then even after that, he still has like that internal guilt of making such a careless action of throwing that at Feely. And so I think for me, that showed, okay, even though that was a jerk thing to do, this is not who he is because we have him continuously apologizing for said
Mhm.
action. And then he still has that internal guilt over the choice that he made to fling his mouth guard at Feely. And I think that that kind of changed my perception of him a little bit and kind of gave me this idea that, okay, like this is not who he is. And he's not someone who likes to carelessly hurt other people's feelings and feels no remorse for it because
But
he,
he
he
also
showed remorse multiple times.
he's showing his temper in that chapter, like he's annoyed and he's acting grumpy. And then he even
Mhm.
makes a note, I think it's before he hits Shan with the ball, where he's like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like none of these guys deserve this attitude. Like he's even like, what
Yeah.
is and then he's like, they don't deserve this, like they're not really doing anything wrong. And then
Mhm.
he kicks the ball. I think the coach says something to him. I can't remember what annoys him, but he kicks the ball and then obviously nearly takes Shan's head clean off because she's
Yeah.
so tiny. Um and then, yeah, he does feel just a lot of guilt for both of those interactions. He's, like, constantly
Yeah.
circling back to them being like, "Oh, I feel so bad."
So a lot of people found it extremely controversial, almost problematic that Johnny went to D to request Shannon's files. I do think it was an invasion of privacy, but I like that Johnny acknowledged that this was an invasion of privacy. He
Mhm.
wasn't arrogant about it. He wasn't like, "Oh, I deserve to know." I think the comment from Marie is what kind of piqued Johnny's interest of wanting to know what was in the file and what she had been through. I keep going back to the fact that Johnny is a protector. So while he's there watching the exchange between Marie and the headmaster, she makes the comment of like, we've been through this before. This is a new school. You said this wouldn't happen here. And that conversation replays in Johnny's mind, which I think ultimately leads him to go have the conversation with Dee to request her file. And when Dee says, I can't give you the file, it's not going to happen, Johnny says, okay, at least can you give me her locker number so I can pay her back for the skirt and the tights? After he drops the quid in her locker, he goes to his car and he's kind of sitting in his car, kind of reeling on the events of the interaction with Shannon, the interaction with Marie, just all of it. And then Gibbsy opens the door, gets in, and throws the file on Johnny's lap. So Gibbsy got the file on his own accord because he knew that Johnny would want to know about Shannon's past. And I do think it's an invasion of privacy that he did it, but I
Mhm.
don't think he was doing this from a place of harm. I think it was more from a place of curiosity, which again doesn't make it right. I think I just didn't think of it as being this
Not malicious. I wouldn't say
yeah,
it
it
was
wasn't
malicious.
malicious.
Yeah, point there is that Johnny is a bulldozer and like he bulldozes through situations and he keeps that up throughout the entire books. And I think as well, what we
Yeah.
know of Shannon, well, and it's definitely what we find out throughout the books, is that she doesn't give information willingly. He probably never would have found out what her backstory was like because she probably never would have told him had he not have read it. And yes, it's a violation of privacy. I actually forgot that he went to D and asked. I always thought that it was a little bit better because Gibbsy just gives him the file, not how Gibbsy obtains it, but Gibbsy just gives it to him. I forgot that he went to D first, and then Gibbs went and got it. But he never would have found that out, and he maybe wouldn't have felt as protective of her, which means their relationship maybe wouldn't have come to fruition. I mean, you can't say that for sure. You have no idea, but it definitely.
I think he still would have been as protective. I really
Mm.
do.
Yeah, but it definitely gives him, but I think this is where the hero complex idea came in from me, because I'm like, okay, he's hit this girl. He obviously feels quite like responsible.
Mhm.
He's now read her file and he's mildly attracted to her, and he's gone like full like caveman on his rugby team, being like, you will not touch or talk about this girl, even though she basically was naked in
Yeah.
front of them. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, he's got a hero complex. I don't know if I'm gonna love him. Um, Especially I think on the back of like the comment of her being so young, looking so young, and then being so attractive. But then when I read it the
Yeah.
second time round, I was like, actually, he definitely just comes across as someone who feels immense guilt and very protective.
Mhm.
I think if it was any girl that he had done that to, it may not have come to a relationship, but he would have felt
Yeah.
like, no, you don't talk about this. Because imagine as well if the academy, where he's going to be a rugby star, he's part of the academy to bring him up to being a rugby. Imagine if they got wind of the fact that he had quite literally concussed a girl, and
Yeah.
almost made her naked in front of the entire team. It wouldn't have gone down well with them. So there was that thing where
Mhm.
he's been thrust into this like responsibility where he has to take responsibility for it. So I think he would have done that regardless.
So after 2 months of not speaking to each other after their initial, meet cute, the next interaction we have of Johnny and Shannon is actually at the rugby match for the Schoolboy Shield Cup. And this is where Johnny and Shannon are staring at each other the entire match. They're locking eyes with each other. And I think that Claire is the one who kind of makes note, like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
Shannon, like he's staring at you. Like, do you see that? And we have Shannon who is immediately blushing, is immediately kind of curls in on herself and is like, Claire, stop, stop, stop. And so I think that also just goes to show you like Shannon's innocence and kind of how they're both still intrigued with each other, but they have yet to have an interaction where they're kind of forced to have that conversation. And at the end of the Schoolboy Shield match, this is where they win the game. They're all running on the field to kind of congratulate each other. We have Gibbsy and Claire who are off to the side having their little cute moment. We have Huey who's running to Katie, picks her up and swinging her around, and they're being cute together. We have Shannon who finally is approached by Johnny and they have their first real conversation since that initial meeting on the pitch. And I think that, and this is where they take the picture. This is the infamous newspaper picture that obviously ends up being quite a big deal for both of them. Um, so 2 months of no contact, we see them finally talking again at the Schoolboy Shield match after they've won the game.
Well, actually, sorry, completely off track, but I just thought to myself, this is also when Claire, her best friend, is saying how she really wants that, and she's looking at her brother Huey with his friend. His girlfriend Katie, who's swinging her around, and Claire's like, "I really want that." And then Gibbs comes over and he starts swinging her friend around, and Shannon notes like, "Oh, I don't know if she's blind, but like you can feel the chemistry wafting off them." But throughout the book, you're made to believe that
Yes.
like Claire has feeling for Gibbs, but Gibbs doesn't have feelings for Claire, and Shannon's just sort of awkwardly standing there, and she's like, "Oh, I feel like an implant." And then Johnny comes and speaks to her, and he's like, "Hey," and then it's really awkward between them because Shannon herself is awkward. I think she gives him a little wave. She's just like, "Hey," and it's just like really awkward between them. And then he gets, what I really love about that is the reporters come over and they start like talking to him and snapping pictures, and he just gets really pissed off, and you can tell that like he has a love of the sports, but he's not there for a love of the
Mhm.
fame. Like he still wants to be a teenager, and then he makes them leave because he says something like, "I'm on school grounds with a minor," and they're like, "Oh god," and they're scrambling away. But one of the things that is really cute about this interaction is he then invites her a
Hugh's
party. I
house for
think
the
it's Hugh,
party.
Hugh's
Yeah. Mhm.
house, yeah. And
Yeah.
he invites her to a party, and she's like, she's thinking to herself for the first time ever, "Oh, I actually really want to go." And then she's like, "Oh no, I can't go." But for the first time ever, she's like, "I want to go with this boy. Like, I want to go to this party."
Yeah.
And she genuinely thinks about saying yes. So this is in the very like first portion of the book. She starts getting that desire to sort of break the mold of her family. And I think as well, you don't have a full weight of what's really going on at home yet. So when you're like, "Oh, she's like, I can't go," you're kind of like, "Well, why not?"
Mhm. One of the interactions I wanted to note on here is Katie and Huey and how they're kind of perceived by all their friends. We have Claire who's watching Huey pick up Katie and spin her around, and she says, I want that one day. And so we see how everyone is under this impression that Katie and Huey are in a happy relationship. One thing I've noticed is that there are not many people, but there are some people in this fandom who are not aware that Huey and Katie are not endgame and they were never going to be endgame. But especially when you're reading the 13s, Katie and Huey look like they're in, a typical teen relationship. They're happy, they're kissing, they have their hands all over each other. And so to me, when anyone says, "Oh, I had no idea that Katie and Huey were not endgame," I don't understand why this upsets people, because in the 13s, they're depicted as being a happy couple. So we know that Huey is actually in game with Lizzie. And now I think that most people in the fandom are finally aware of, like, this was always going to be a temporary relationship. But I'm not sure why it bothers so many people when they are initially confused. Because again, in the 13s, they are depicted as a happy, flirtatious couple. And even Claire says, "I want that one day." So I think that the perception of their relationship in the 13s is obviously very different than what we're going to see, in C/T10. But it kind of does bother me when people are like, "Oh, like, how did you ever think that Katie and Huey were in game?" And it's like, well, because of interactions like this.
To add to that point is later on in the 13s, when Shannon finally starts getting a bit of freedom for herself, she goes over to Claire's house, and Claire is obviously Huey's sister, and they're all in their Claire's bedroom, and they're having a conversation about sex, surrounding sex, and Hugh turns out to be eavesdropping, and Claire starts mocking Hugh, and she's talking about him sleeping with Katie, and she's like, don't think I can't hear you or whatever. His end game is in the room with them whilst they're having this conversation, and she laughs at that interaction. Shannon notes that she laughs, and that's all her reaction that she has. So there's no point where you kind of in the 13s ever think that Liz and Hugh, in my eyes, that Liz and Hugh were ever going to be endgame. I never thought that they were a thing. It's only in R6 where you start to get that kind of impression, which we can talk about at another point. But in Bindings, they don't. Katie and Huey seem like a really solid, really healthy couple that are happy and in love. Like, you don't ever get the impression that they were going to be anything other than a happy, healthy couple. And they seem to be couple goals for everyone. Like, even Johnny says, like, "Oh, I see my friends in relationships. I see Huey with his little pretty redhead." He's like, and sometimes I think, like, I should have time for that, but I just don't have the time for it. So even Johnny remarks that they're like quite a happy couple. Claire says to Shannon, like, "I want that." Shannon remarks they're really cute together, and he spins her around and she's there for all his games. Like, no one at any point is like, "Oh, there could be this other friction going on." No one else notices it. So and it could just be that from their point of views it just doesn't look like that, right? But that is what you get the impression from, because that is the point of view you are reading. So in the first two books, you never get the impression that Huey and Katie are anything other than a really happy, loving couple. That is the impression that the books give you, and it only starts to sort of fracture later on in the series. So for people to be like, "Oh, well, you should have just guessed," is a bit ridiculous. And I think a lot of people, as the point of views come out, they forget about what the other point of views say, which is one of the things that we both talk about on our TikToks when we're talking about the series, is that no, because if you look at it from this point of view, this is what it looks like. And I think a lot of people forget that there's multiple point of views. So just because one person's point of view says one thing, it doesn't eclipse the rest of everyone else's point of views.
In Binding 13, I do think it's very easy to get the perception that Katie and Hugh are a happy couple. And then I think I start to see a little bit of the cracks in Keeping, but certainly when you get to the 6s, you start to become very aware that, like, oh, this is not the full picture.
Yeah.
You have to know what you're looking for. And not just that what you're looking for, you also don't know much until you get the new perspective. So when we get C/T10 that covers the same timeline of Binding and Keeping 13, there are going to be things that we all missed because we didn't know what was happening, not only with Lizzie and Huey, but also with Patrick and Katie. So I think it's going to be very interesting to come back to the 13s when we have the new timeline that encompasses Binding and Keeping 13 to kind of show us what's actually happening behind the scenes.
The next time we kind of get any interaction with him, Shannon's coming out of the bathroom and she bumps into a hard chest. And when you read it, you initially think, "Oh, she's bumped into Johnny." And then no, it's this guy called Ronan who is antagonizing her and trying to, like, get her into the bathroom. And then all of a sudden he's being a bit creepy and he's being pulled away and she's watching who's pulling him away. And again, I was like, it's Johnny, but no, it was Gibbsy. It's Gibbsy pulling him away. And she notes, she's like, "Oh, it's a tall, broad back. It's a strong, muscular back." And then she's like, "It's number 7." And she's like, "Oh, Gibbsy Gibson." And that's how she remarks it, which I think is really great of Gibbs. He's overheard it. And I think a lot of people will probably put it down to it was Johnny's orders. But I think that's just who Gibbs is. He would protect anyone in that situation. And he's sort of chuckling as he pulls Ronan away from being a creepy creepster. And he's like, "Oh, you have a death wish." And he's like pulling him away. And Shannon immediately sort of notes that she sort of feels safe safe with Gibbs. I think in that interaction, she's like, "Oh, he's pulling him away," and I think it just is a testament to what a great duo Johnny and Gibbs are, because Gibbs is like
Mhm.
there yanking him away, and then I think Johnny turns up and starts bulldozing, and even Gibbs is like, "Don't bulldoze," and he's like, "Well, you what?" He just starts screaming, and he's like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
count to 3." Yeah. How did you feel when you first read that scene?
I love this scene because it shows you how protective not only Johnny is of Shannon, but also Gibbsy. And we know that when Johnny initially confronted the boys in the locker room about what happened with Shannon and basically said, like, I don't want to see anyone mocking her or giving her trouble for what they witnessed, we know that Ronan was the only person to kind of pipe up and kind of get a rise out of Johnny. So I think that when Gibbsy sees Ronan at the bathroom kind of talking to Shannon, he didn't really need to hear what was happening to know that Ronan was giving her a hard time. So I really appreciate that Gibbsy just immediately took action and in a sense bulldozed as well to kind of get Shannon out of that situation. And then we have Johnny, who of course comes in, same thing, basically tells Ronan, "You're dead meat. I told you to stay away from her." And I think that Johnny looks back and notes and he says how terrified Shannon looks. And I think that it reinforces that idea, like you spoke about earlier, how Shannon is very conflict avoidant and how these situations make her extremely anxious. And we see her run to the bathroom and she kind of breaks down and starts crying and basically looks at the time and realizes, I've already missed my bus. What now? And I think that she stays in the bathroom for a while. And again, Johnny goes to his car. He's sitting there reeling about what's happened. And I appreciate that he didn't actually leave without going to check on Shannon and making sure that she actually went home, because we know that she would have been sitting in that bathroom until about 9 p.m. for the next bus. So I appreciate that he did wait for her. He checked on her. And as soon as she comes out of the bathroom, he immediately sees her and, says, I'm going to take you home. Is that okay? And then we have that cute scene of Joey talking to Shannon on the phone and basically says, like, put him on the phone. Let me speak to this boy who's, old enough to be driving you home. You're 15 years old. Does he know you're 15? And so, like, I think that was such a cute moment between Joey and Shannon. And I think that you kind of start to see what their relationship is like and how, despite Joey not being there to help her, he still wants to make sure that she's safe in this moment. And, the conversation between Joey and Johnny, again, is just so funny. The way he's like, 17, yep, Johnny Kavanaugh. Like, and so it's just so funny, like the immediate recognition for Joey on who he is, while subtly also still making sure that he's going to be safe and knows that if anything happens to Shannon, like it's going to be your ass, basically. And so I love that moment between Joey and Shannon and Joey and Johnny as well.
What doesn't help in that scene is Johnny says, "I know what age I am yet," and it's like reinforcing that idea to Johnny that the age gap is too large and it's too big and it's too
Yeah.
great. And he's like, "No, yeah, I know I'm too old for her. Like, don't worry, it's just as friends. Like, I'll be good." So in his
Hmm.
head, it's like, "Yeah, I know." Like, Joey's really ramping up this idea to Johnny that like he's too old for her. The age gap is too great. She's only 15. And Johnny's like, yeah, I know." So to him, it's sending that message home again that it's a problem, even though like it's a year and 10 months. So it like is
Hmm.
aiding his belief system that he's too old for her. But yeah, it's one of my
Yep.
favorite scenes. And it really shows their tight knit bond and how much Joey is also a protector. And I think getting the green light from Joe helps Shannon like sort of I think realistically if Shannon didn't feel safe, she wouldn't have gone with Johnny, to be fair. But I think getting the green
Yeah.
light from Joe and Joe like vetting him out makes her feel safe too, because she's like, oh, Joey's kind of
Hmm.
approved. And also there was no way for her to get home, so she really had no choice. But then what happens in the car isn't so great, because it's kind of like their first normal interaction. And then Johnny
Hmm.
turns into being a bit of a dick because she notices things about him that he doesn't want anyone to notice because she's been paying so much attention to him. And she sort of feels like she does stand up for herself though. Like, doesn't she storm out of the car
Yeah.
after their argument?
She
Yeah.
does. And I think that in that conversation, you start to realize that Shannon actually does know how to handle herself. Shannon and Johnny are getting to know each other. He's asking her questions about her family, about herself. And we have like this really cute moment where they're both just able to kind of talk freely between each other. And then, of course, Shannon starts to note, like, oh, what's wrong with your leg? What's going on? And I think that Johnny's guard was down mostly because Shannon admitted that she knew nothing about rugby. So him being rugby royalty, he's kind of used to everyone using him for his fame and for him being the popular rugby player. And so Shannon not knowing anything about rugby, anything about him, I think that actually helped Johnny lower his guard. And I think that's why he felt so comfortable talking to her about his injury. And one thing that I think that a lot of people kind of downplay is how much rugby means to him. And I think that's why we see him kind of have that moment of kind of lashing out at Shannon because he, in a moment of weakness, tells Shannon about his injury. And the moment he gets it out, he immediately says, well, it's actually my groin. I'll tell you that. So when you go tell everybody, you get your facts straight. And she's like, what do you mean? Who am I going to tell? And it really hurt me for Shannon because Shannon, as we know, is very meek. She's very kind. She would never tell someone's secret. And I think that Johnny, again, got very defensive because he realized I just told my biggest secret to a girl I don't even know because my guard was down. And now, with this one simple fact, she could ruin so much for me. And so I don't like the way that Johnny treated Shannon in that moment, but I can understand what he felt and why he felt so cornered and why he felt so anxious about what he had just done. But my favorite line from Shannon is, I think you're in denial about your healing process, and I know you're hurt. You limp at school. Did you know that? All the time. Others might notice it, but I do. I see it and you do it all the time. So I think you're playing a dangerous game with your body, Johnny. And I think if your doctors knew how much pain you're actually in, there's no way they would have signed off and released you to play. And I love that she says, I had no idea where this came from, but the words were bursting to come out of my mouth, so I let them spill.
It shows as well that she's really perceptive. Like, obviously, she's
Mhm.
perceptive to Johnny, but she's been paying attention to him enough to notice that he's limping, which no one else has noticed. Or if they have, they haven't
Yeah.
brought it up at all. Which I think leads into another point that we'll talk about at some point, which is Johnny's parents not being massively involved, because someone else, aside from some girl who he has barely interacted with, should have been noticing that this boy has a limp. But she notices that he has a limp and she pays attention to it. And it obviously just really freaks him out. Especially like having someone notice the things that you're trying to hide from the world, and having that person that you
Mhm.
don't know notice that and bring it up to you, and he's just there like completely panicking over it, which I think is a really fair
Mhm.
reaction of Johnny to have. But you have to really think about his reaction, because as well, you're viewing it from Shannon's point of view, and she's there like, what the hell. But I really like that she says to him, it's because you know that when they find out about this injury, your dream's going to be evaporated. But in his mind, he's going, well, that's because you know about it. And now you're going to obviously grass me up and I'm going to get in loads of trouble. And so he starts going on the deflective. And I'm pretty sure she storms out of the car and like slams the door behind her as she storms away. Which
Yeah.
just seems like for someone like Shannon, it's not something she would do, but she feels like safe enough to sort of
Mhm.
express herself, even though they've just met each other, and she does storm away from him, and I think he calls her
Mhm.
name, and she doesn't turn back. She just keeps on going. She goes back
Yeah.
to the house. He's like, "No, come back." And she's like, "No." And she just keeps on walking off. Like, she storms away from him. And so it shows that she has
Yeah.
got it in her to start standing up for herself. She just sort of needs to come out of her
Mhm.
shell a bit. And that's in like one of the very first interactions. So she has the ability to stand up for herself, which I think
Mhm.
is really important to note, because later on throughout the series, she does start to get more and more
Yeah.
out of the shell.
So on the way home, Johnny's kind of still reeling from this conversation, and he kind of notes like how Shannon 110% like called him out on his bullshit and his injury, and kind of how him hiding his injury is really what's causing him so much anxiety and stress. And so I really like that Shannon was able to kind of have that full honest conversation with him. And I think that we see how it starts to kind of get under Johnny's skin that like Shannon had hit the nail on the head. And then we walk in, and this is our first introduction to Adele, who is Johnny's mom. And I know that you're very, very passionate about their relationship. So I'll let you go ahead and talk about Johnny and Adele's relationship as, we finally see them unfold.
Yeah, so for me, Johnny obviously has this chronic injury, he's in chronic pain, and he is not a good enough. One of the things that they note throughout the books is Johnny is not a very good liar. He doesn't lie very
Mhm.
well, and I'm pretty sure she says it multiple times. His mum says to him, like, "You can't lie to me. I'm your mother. I birthed you. I can see you. I can read you." And he has this chronic pain and this limp that a girl who barely knows him notices within like the first 3 months of watching him. And his mum,
Mhm.
who we know, as we find out throughout the series, is perceptive, she doesn't notice
Mhm.
that her son is in chronic pain. And the reason why she doesn't notice is because she is never home. They're never there, which she notes within, like, she's like, "Oh, I'm going away." And I think as well, what people glaze over is John spends a lot of the time so they're away for work throughout the week. And then on the weekends,
Mhm.
John often chooses to stay in Dublin for the weekends too. And Deli is like, I can't say her name for some reason, but Deli is like, "I'm
It's
going to
yeah.
stay with your dad." But my head just says Edel, like it just goes Edel. But yeah, she's like, "I'm going to stay with your dad for the weekend." So sometimes Johnny is left for weeks at a time by himself, which if you were to look at it from like a clinical point of view, it would fall under neglect in terms of like a lack of supervision. There's loads of different multiple terms of neglect. Like it would be that he doesn't have access to food, that he doesn't have access to clean clothes, that he doesn't have access, which we know he has access to. Like he's well looked after in
Mhm.
terms of that. But from a young age, they move him to Cork, which you find out in They moved him from Dublin to Cork. He was playing for a team called Royce, which is that who they play in the first match? That's or they play it
Yeah,
in the
this
book.
coming up. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
about to
they play at
face
the end
Roy.
of the book. So he was going to play in a team called Royce, which are renowned for their rugby, and they pull him out of that. They pull him to Cork, and then they continuously leave him alone in this huge house at the care of babysitters. And when I point this out to people, they're like, "Yeah, but his grandmother was dying," and I'm like, "But then one of the things that the theme throughout the book is that the needs of the adult never outweigh the needs of the children, and in the books, the needs of the adults always outweigh the needs of the children, and it winds me up to no end." And they leave him all the time. They don't go to his rugby matches. She consistently says that she doesn't do it because she doesn't like the fact that he plays rugby. And she leaves him alone all the time. And had she have been around, she would have noticed that he was in chronic pain. She would have got him to the doctors. And she makes a note at some point in the books, I can't remember exactly where she's like, "Yeah, but the only person you were lying to was yourself. But also you should have been around. Where were you when
Mhm,
this was happening to him?" Like she again, Johnny has all this responsibility put on his shoulders all the time. And even with his chronic
mhm.
illness, she's again putting the responsibility back on his shoulders by being like, "Yeah, but were only lying to yourself. Like the only person you were harming in that lie was yourself." And he's just like, "Yeah, yeah." And he feels shit about it. But where were you as the mum?
We know that Adele is working in London, and we know that John is taking big cases in Dublin, and so I think that this is where a lot of his maturity comes from,
Hmm.
is the fact that he was left alone, and he talks about how, I think at the age of 14 was the last time she had hired a babysitter to check on him while she was gone, and then since then, he's kind of had free range by himself, and I think that although I do love Adele, I think it's okay to note that, like, this was a little neglectful on their behalf to
Yeah.
leave a 14-year-old boy, but it's easy to see why Johnny took on so much responsibility, why he matured so quickly, and why he was so dead set on becoming a professional athlete because he had the drive, he had the ambition, and without parents to be there, he was able to just 24/7 only be worrying about his future in rugby.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge how hard this injury was for him, and I think it's like, he's been working on this dream for 7 years now, and for the past 3 years, it's been full send of training, eating properly, physio, nutritionist, so many things that he recants focusing on, and so for all that to be potentially stripped away over a minor surgery that should have healed 10 weeks ago is a really hard reality for him. And I think a lot of people do overlook the trauma associated with his injury
Hmm.
and with his recovery and kind of what he felt like that took away from for himself.
He would have been in severe pain and really freaking out and really worried. And also, he
Mhm.
had no one he felt he could go to. He couldn't go to his mum
Yeah.
about it. He couldn't go to his dad about it. He couldn't go to the academy about it. He could only go to Gibbsy and then later on Shannon. But we
Yeah.
know throughout the books that Delhi is really perceptive. She picks up on things that other people
Mhm.
probably wouldn't picked up. And had she have been there, she would have noticed that. I mean, she does at one point. He's walking up the stairs and he's limping, and she's like, "You're limping," and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's just a hard day." She notes that about him, but she doesn't do
Yeah.
anything about it, and she just sods off back to
Mhm.
wherever the hell she came from and just leaves him to deal with it on his own once again. It really winds me up because I think they for so much that they get right and for so much you can tell that she really loves her son. Like there's no doubt
Yeah.
about she
Mhm.
absolutely dotes on him. And I imagine during Johnny's most formative years, she was an incredible, wonderful, great mother and really present and really there. But as he gets older, they sort of thrust all this responsibility on him, or they see that he's capable of having responsibility and thrust on him, and they don't sort of take the edge off. They just thrust even more on him, and they trust him almost to a point
Mhm.
of neglect. And people, when you bring this up, are really defensive of them, thinking that you're like saying
Mhm.
they're the worst parents ever. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think they are very
Mhm.
loving, doting parents, but they also
Yeah.
prioritize their careers over the needs of their child because they give him too much responsibility, and it debilitates him in the end because he ends up with a chronic condition that no one notices, that no one in a
Yeah.
position of um power who can do anything about it is
Mhm.
notices because they just leave him to it and all the time. And had they have been around, they probably would have been more aware. And obviously when the problem, which is something to talk about later down the line, but when the problem eventually gets resolved, they are there for him, and they throughout
Mhm.
it they are always there for him. They have to know the problem
Yeah.
first, but he has to voice it, which he wasn't going to do with this, for them to be around. And they should have
Well, and
been.
he didn't even voice it. It was a rugby match that kind of put him
Yeah.
out of the game, so he was still hiding it. He was still not ready to come forward and talk to his parents about it, so when we get to a later part in the book, we see how an injury ultimately leads him into being put into the emergency room. So it wasn't even that he felt comfortable coming to them. He wasn't ready to accept the reality that his injury was still, still healing and that he was continuing to damage his body. So it just goes to show you just how dedicated he was to the point of almost destruction
Mhm.
and how he still wasn't ready to come to them. And again, we know that Gibbsy knew, we knew that Shan knew, but again, that still wasn't enough for him to slow down and kind of reevaluate his health and his injury. And it's just sad to see, honestly, because he sees his worth in his athletic ability. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that's very, very overlooked is people think, oh, like he was only obsessed with rugby. But it wasn't just that he was obsessed with rugby, is that all of his worth he felt like was tied into rugby and his
Yeah.
goals and his future, and that this injury was going to change everything. And he was not ready to accept that reality of what this injury could mean, and I think that's why we see him for so long fighting off his chronic pain, fighting off, the pus, the inflammation, like not being able to walk, the 24/7 icing, like just so many things to just keep himself in this mindset of I'm okay, things are going to be okay, even when he knew that they were not going to be okay.
So yeah, he is his self-worth and his confidence is directly tied into his ability to play rugby, which plays out throughout the books as well, where he says, and I think as well people will have reinforced that, like Bella, who's someone that he was sleeping with, would have been reinforcing that because they go to Johnny for the
Mhm.
status. And one of the things he says
Yeah.
to Shan is like, would you still have feelings for me if I couldn't play rugby anymore? And she's like, yeah. Um, so that's one of the things that they talk about is that he believes that he is only good so long as he has an ability to play rugby, and that is slipping
Yeah.
away from him. And
Mhm.
so it would have been absolutely terrifying to him, but I think it's glazed over because he's still able to play rugby at a school level.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
obviously glazed over.
So during the school boy shield match, we know that Johnny and Shannon take a picture together that ends up on the front page of the newspaper. So when Shannon gets home from school, she walks in and she immediately notes the tension radiating off Teddy. And she kind of talks about how, like, she knows that something bad is coming. And so one of the first comments that Teddy makes to her is, "What's your little boyfriend?" And of course, Shannon is immediately on edge and says, "What are you talking about?" And that's when we see the newspaper that Shannon, of course, is oblivious to knowing about its existence. So Teddy, I think, smacks her in the face with the newspaper,
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
so he smacks her in the face with the newspaper, and she sees her face on the front page with Johnny. And she trying to, she starts to panic, and she tells Teddy, like, "Oh, everyone in the school took a picture of Johnny. It wasn't just me." And of course, he calls her a liar, starts calling her names. And this is our first interaction seeing just how abusive his relationship is with Shannon. And I think that he picks Shannon up by the throat and slams her against the refrigerator and basically starts calling her horrible, degrading names to kind of get his point across. So as Teddy is literally choking Shannon and she says that I can't breathe, we notice that Shannon says, "My relief came at the sound of the front door closing," and walks Joey. So we have Joey who walks in and he immediately notices what's happening. I think it's not really hard for him to understand what's going on in the scene. And although he is very limited on information, he knows that there's something going on between Teddy and Shannon. So he immediately starts to de escalate the situation by asking Shannon how her day was. And I think he kind of makes a joke like, "How's it going, family?" And, he grabs a snack, hands it to Shannon, and then he nudges her cheek with his hand as like a sign of solidarity. And I love this scene because you start to see what Joey's role is like as a big brother. And we see him again. He comes in, he immediately just de escalates the situation, shows Shannon that little sign of solidarity, and gives her the biscuits. And she goes upstairs, slams her door, and she says that she puts her headphones on and gets under the covers. And she talks about how she cranked the volume up to try and drown out the noise. And she says that I got 2 songs in before I heard the sound of screaming and furniture crashing.
So also going between it, Joey's
Mhm,
like Teddy says, "Oh, this isn't." He's made some kind of comment about how, like, basically Joey can't give Shan the food, and Joey's like, "I pay my way." So you find out in this scene that
mhm,
like Joey pays his way in that house. I mean, he's working in the garage, but you find out like he's paying his way as well. And he's like, "You don't get to tell me what to do because this is my food. Like I bought this food.
mhm,
I can give her my snacks." And he's like, "You go upstairs." And yeah, she has to wait 2 songs before she starts hearing, the furniture breaking and the screaming and the shouts. And you
mhm.
know that at this point that Joey is her protector, her safe person, so, but you have no idea who the fight downstairs is going on between. You just assume that it's Joey, and like you have no idea because she puts her headphones in and she just finds to try and drown it out. So you're like, oh, it must be Joey and Teddy, which I think it is. But you don't know, that you have no idea if who swung first, what the fight is like. You have no idea
Mhm.
really what how the violence is escalating downstairs. Because where was Marie in that interaction? Was she at work? Like you have, I don't think it's mentioned at that point. She just walks in and Teddy's there and he's being
Mhm.
aggressive. So you have no idea if Marie's coming from work. You have no, like, you just know that this man now is propositioned as the violent one, and you're assuming that, you know, it's between Joe, but you have no idea what ways his violence goes. So I think it's a really interesting introduction to her home life and how hard it is, and the
Mhm.
role that Joe plays as protector. Um, and the little show of solidarity is something that I truly adore.
I think that they are my favorite sibling dynamic of this entire series by far, because Shannon says as soon as she hears the door close on the landing, she's immediately springing out of bed to go check on Joey because she knows that they just had a physical altercation. And she walks in and Joey has the tissue on his mouth and talks about how like he's bleeding. And, he says, it's nothing, Shan, it's nothing, Shan, don't worry about it. And then she kind of stands in the doorway and then he finally pats the bed for her to come sit down next to him. And like we have this moment where like they're talking to each other. But I think it's so comforting to see how in continuously throughout this entire series, how Joey and Shannon are always there for each other and they're always reinforcing like we're going to take care of each other. And we see that Joey goes to his dresser and pulls out the sleeping bag and the pillow and like settles into the ground and Shannon just crawls into his bed. And I thought that moment was so cute between them because it's like you can tell that in that moment Joey is aware of how much anxiety Shannon still has over the situation and how her safe space is always going to be next to Joey. We haven't discussed the impact of Darren leaving the family just yet. But one thing I did want to know is that Shannon is very aware of how Darren's absence kind of affected their home. And Shannon says, can you do me a favor? And she says, please don't do what Darren did to us. Don't leave me. And Joey says, I won't. I won't ever leave you here with him. And she says, Mom is never going to leave him. And Joey says, Mom can do whatever she wants. She made her bed when she took him back last time. She can keep popping out his offspring and put up with his bullshit for the rest of her life. But you and me, we stick together. So it's like people want to think that Shannon was a burden to Joey, but he says the exact opposite. He says, but you and me, we stick together. And he talks about how when he gets out of here, he's going to save up money, get a flat, and he's coming back for her, and that he has no intention of ever leaving her behind. And I think that if Joey viewed her as a burden, he wouldn't be trying to continuously make these promises to Shannon. And he continuously reminds Shannon, like, it's me and you, we're sticking together, and I will never leave you behind.
And also, Joey takes on the parent role for all his siblings. And if you
Mhm.
had a parent who viewed their child as a burden, do you think they would be so loving and doting and caring and be able to raise such well rounded children? No. But Joey manages to do it because they feel his love. You know, they understand the
Mhm.
feelings that he has for them and he is always there for them. He doesn't come at it with a feeling of, oh, you are so burdensome to me. You're so annoying. I don't want to do this. He
Yeah.
comes at it from a place of, I love you. I adore you. And I'm going to do the best I can for you, whilst also really fucking
Mhm.
hating the situation that I have been placed into. I don't want to be in this role, but if I'm going to be in this role, then I'm going to fulfill it to my best ability, which is exactly what he does. It's not a burdensome role to him. He's just
Yeah.
resentful of the dynamics that he's been forced into. So I think it's a really ridiculous point and it doesn't make much sense, especially given the text that we have.
I think this is one of my favorite scenes between Joey and Shannon because we finally see the beginning dynamics of Joey and Shannon's friendship and their relationship and just how much they mean to each other. And I think that they have my favorite sibling bond of this entire series. And I think it's because we see how loyal and protective they both are of each other. And I love Joey's promise to Shannon that he is never going to leave her behind and like we are a team. And I think it just continues to reiterate again just how much love they have for each other and how at the end of the day it's always going to be the two of them looking out for each other and Joey is Shannon's safe space, and Joey also has that same level of love and loyalty to Shannon. What are your thoughts on this final scene?
I don't really have anything else to add. I think it's just such a beautiful scene between them, especially given like it's a real contrast to the violence that they're giving in their home, and it shows just the bond that they have and how beautiful their bond is. And I think it also feeds
Mhm.
into what she needs from Johnny and how much she needs a protector, and that's probably what she would be looking for in a partner, someone who makes her feel safe. Not that to say that she'd be looking for what her brother has in a partner, but it's that she needs someone who feels safe. And I'd like to see how the sort of not parallels, but like how you know, there's a dynamic where Shannon needs people to look after her, and she has her brother who does that for her, but how it'd be nice to have someone outside of the home who also does that.
And this is why I love Johnny being such a protector. We have Joey, who's her safety net at home. We have Johnny, who's her safety net at school. And I think that him being protective and also keeping his promise is what gives their relationship that foundation that it needs for her to feel secure and safe. And so, again, I think I just love how much he's willing to protect her without question. So this concludes our first episode, leaving us off at chapter 19. Next week, we'll be starting out with Shannon and Johnny's first date and also Johnny's first time confronting Shannon's bullies. If you'd like to hear more, please subscribe below. Thanks for tuning in to the Tommen Chronicles.